The night my husband broke my phone was the night I realized silence had been trained into me. It wasn't the first time he'd raised his hand. It wasn't the worst bruise I'd hidden under long sleeves. It was just the first time something inside me went completely still. Not fear, not anger. Recognition. My name is Laura Bennett. I was 30 years old then, a supermarket cashier on the late shift at a regional grocery chain outside Columbus, Ohio. I scanned groceries for a living. Bread, milk, pet food, diapers. I knew the regulars by their habits and the sound of their footsteps. I knew which coupons would fail before the register beeped. I knew how to smile without showing teeth. I also knew how to make myself small. That night, I'd come home 10 minutes late. The bus had been delayed. I texted my husband Eric to let him know. He didn't answer. When I walked into our apartment, his mother, Donna, was already there, sitting at our kitchen table like she owned the place. Because in her mind, she did. "You think the world waits for you?" Eric said, standing up too fast. I didn't answer. I set my bag down. That was mistake number 1. He grabbed my phone from the counter, scrolled through it, then threw it against the wall. It shattered. Donna sighed like I'd embarrassed her. "You make him angry on purpose," she said. "A wife should know her role." I nodded, not because I agreed, because nodding shortened the moment. I slept on the couch that night. I always did after arguments. It was easier to wake up sore than to explain myself to people who'd already decided who I was. At work the next day, I moved on autopilot. My manager, Pete, asked if I was okay. I said yes. Customers complained about prices. I apologized. A little girl dropped her stuffed dog on my register, and I picked it up gently, brushing off crumbs. I remember thinking, some things are treated with more care than I am. Eric had lost his job 6 months earlier. Construction layoffs. It wasn't his fault, at least not at first. But the longer he stayed home, the more the house shrank. His father, Harold, called daily to remind me that Eric was between opportunities and I should be more supportive. Supportive meant overtime. Supportive meant silence. Donna told me often that I was lucky. No education, no ambition. "At least you married into a family," she'd say, as if I were a charity case they tolerated. I believed them longer than I should have. The small thing that started the unraveling came a week later. A man came through my line just before closing. Mid-50s, well-dressed, but not flashy. He bought a basket of simple things: apples, chicken, dog treats. He smiled politely and waited while the register lagged. "Long day?" he asked. "Long life," I said, before I could stop myself. He laughed, not unkindly. I know the feeling. His name was Thomas Hale. I didn't know that then. I only noticed that he thanked me like I'd done him a favor instead of a job. He came back the next night. And the night after that. We never talked long, just enough. He remembered my name, asked how my day was. Once, he noticed the fading bruise on my wrist and didn't ask about it. That mattered. One evening, as I was clocking out, he waited near the exit. "I don't want to overstep," he said carefully, "but I'm on the board of a local nonprofit. We're partnering with stores to help employees in difficult situations. If you ever need resources." He handed me a card. No pressure. No pity. I almost threw it away. Instead, I hid it in my locker. At home, Eric was drunk. Donna was on speakerphone. They laughed about something I hadn't said. "You should be grateful," Donna said loudly through the phone. "Without us, you'd be nothing." I stood in the doorway and watched them. And for the first time, I didn't feel shame. I felt distance. That night, Eric shoved me hard enough to leave a mark on my shoulder. He didn't apologize. He never did. I didn't cry. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. I thought about the little girl's stuffed dog, about the card in my locker, about the way Thomas Hale had spoken to me like I mattered. I understood something then. Love, in that house, had always come with conditions. Obedience. Silence. Erasure. I didn't know yet how I would leave. I didn't know what it would cost. I didn't know that Thomas Hale was the chairman of a logistics company with operations in 5 states, or that he would later become the most unexpected ally in my life. All I knew was this: I was done mistaking survival for loyalty. And once that thought settled in, Nothing they did to me felt permanent anymore. I didn't leave that night. That's the part people always expect first. A dramatic exit, a suitcase, a slammed door. Real life doesn't move that cleanly. The morning after Eric shoved me, I woke up before dawn, made coffee, and ironed his shirt like I always did. Donna had left sometime after midnight. Eric snored on the bed, one arm flung across my side like a claim. I moved carefully so I wouldn't wake him. At work, the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual. I counted change twice. My hands shook when I scanned glass bottles. Pete noticed again. "You sure you're okay, Laura?" he asked. "I'm just tired," I said. That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. During my break, I went to my locker and took out the card Thomas had given me. I stared at it longer than necessary. Thomas Hale Distribution Group, Community Outreach Initiative. There was a phone number and an email address. Nothing flashy. No titles. I folded the card and put it back. Asking for help still felt like failure. That evening, Donna came over again. No warning. She never needed one. She went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and frowned. "You don't keep the house like you should," she said. "Eric needs stability." Eric sat on the couch, scrolling on his phone. He didn't look up. I served dinner. Chicken thighs, rice, cheap vegetables. Donna picked at her plate. "This is what you make?" she asked. No wonder my son's unhappy. Something in me shifted. Not anger. Clarity. I watched them talk about me as if I wasn't there. About my job, my hours, my tone, my face. It occurred to me then that nothing I did would ever be enough. That realization didn't break me. It freed me. The next morning, Eric demanded my debit card. "I need cash," he said. "Don't start." I handed it over. But that afternoon, on my lunch break, I opened a new checking account at a branch near the store. I deposited $20. The teller smiled, like it was nothing. To me, it was everything. I didn't tell anyone. Small steps are safer when no one is watching. Over the next week, I started paying attention to things I'd learned to ignore. The way Eric checked my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The way Donna asked questions about my schedule, then criticized it. The way Harold suggested, casually, that Eric should handle me better. It wasn't one person. It was a system. And I was the quiet part that made it work. Thomas came through my line again on Friday. "You look different," he said. "Tired," I replied automatically. "No," he said gently. "Focused." I didn't answer. He paid, thanked me, and as he turned to leave, he said something that stopped me cold. "You don't owe anyone your silence." I don't know how he knew. I just know I stood there long after he walked out. That night, Eric didn't come home until late. Drunk, angry. He accused me of flirting, of disrespect, of making him look small. He shoved me again. This time, I fell. I hit my elbow hard on the coffee table. Pain flared, sharp and immediate. Something inside me snapped into place. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and locked the door. He banged on it for a while. Then he laughed. Then he went to sleep on the couch. I sat on the bed, shaking, and opened my laptop. I searched for domestic violence resources. I searched for legal separation in Ohio. I searched for how to document abuse without escalating it. I learned a lot that night. I learned that what I was living with had a name. I learned that bruises weren't required for harm to count. I learned that silence protects the person who benefits from it. The next morning, I took photos of my elbow. I saved them to a cloud account Eric didn't know about. I started a folder. I didn't feel brave. I felt methodical. On Sunday, Donna called and told me Eric was depressed because of me, that I needed to fix it. "I'm trying," I said. That was true too. I just wasn't fixing what she thought. On Monday, Thomas emailed me. He kept it professional. "Laura, if you're interested, our nonprofit partner is hosting an information session for grocery employees next week. No commitment, just resources. Take care, Thomas." I stared at the email for a long time. Then I replied, "Thank you. I'd like to attend." I deleted the sent email immediately. At work, I picked up an extra shift. At home, I moved my important documents into my locker. Birth certificate, social security card. The little things people tell you to grab after it's too late. Eric didn't notice. He never noticed preparation. He only noticed defiance. The session was held in a community center 10 minutes from the store. I told Eric I was covering for a coworker. Inside, there were folding chairs, coffee, pamphlets. Normal people. Ordinary lives. No one stared at me. A woman spoke about financial independence. Another about legal options. No pressure, no shame. Thomas was there, but he didn't approach me. He stayed in the back, like he didn't want to make himself part of my decision. That mattered. At the end, he handed me an envelope. Information, he said. Use it or don't. Inside was a list of contacts, legal aid, counseling, temporary housing, and a handwritten note. Whatever you choose it for yourself. I went home and hid the envelope under the mattress. That night, Eric screamed at me for forgetting to buy beer. He threw a glass at the wall. It shattered inches from my head. Donna texted me afterward. You pushed him too far. I didn't reply. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and understood something with startling clarity. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing control. And that meant I was closer to freedom than I'd ever been. The first time I left the apartment overnight, no one noticed until morning. That was the part that stayed with me. Eric had passed out on the couch after another argument that barely registered as one anymore. Donna's voice still echoed in my head from a voicemail she'd left earlier, reminding me that a real wife didn't sleep when her husband was upset. I stood in the doorway for a long time, keys in my hand, listening to the uneven sound of his breathing. Then I walked out. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't turn off the lights. I didn't leave a note. I just drove to a 24-hour diner near the interstate and sat in a booth until sunrise, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like metal. I wasn't running. I was testing something. When I checked my phone at 6 a.m., there were no missed calls, no texts, nothing. The realization landed slowly, and then all at once. I could disappear for hours, and nothing changed. That morning, instead of going home, I went to work early. Pete looked surprised to see me. You okay? He asked. Yes, I said. And this time, it was closer to the truth than it had ever been. Thomas didn't come through my line that day, but an email from him waited in my inbox during my lunch break. I hope this session was helpful. If you'd like, I can connect you directly with one of our legal partners. No obligation. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Then I typed back. I'd appreciate that. The reply came 10 minutes later. I'll have someone reach out. That evening, when I finally went home, Eric was awake. He glared at me like I'd committed a crime. Where were you? He demanded. Working, I said. He scoffed. Don't lie to me. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just walked past him into the bedroom and shut the door. He followed, grabbing my arm hard enough to hurt. You think you can just ignore me now? He said. I looked at him. Really looked. And something changed in my face because he hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Let go, I said. He did. Not because he suddenly respected me, because something in my stillness unsettled him. That night, I slept with my phone under my pillow and my shoes by the bed. The call from the legal aid office came 2 days later. Her name was Cynthia Morales. Calm voice, no rushed questions. She didn't ask why I stayed. She didn't ask what I'd done to provoke anything. She didn't sound surprised by anything I told her. That alone made me trust her. We can help you file for a legal separation, she said. We can also discuss a protection order if needed. But the first step is documentation. I've started that, I said. Good, she replied. You're ahead of where most people are when they call. That word again. Ahead. I didn't feel ahead. I felt like I was walking through fog, with my arms out, feeling for edges. Still, I listened. I took notes. I asked questions about money, housing, and timelines. When I hung up, I sat very still. Nothing in my life had changed yet, but everything was in motion. Eric sensed it. He started checking my bag when I came home. He accused me of talking to someone. Donna began calling more often, her voice sharp with suspicion. You're acting strange, she said. Don't get ideas above your station. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. At work, something else shifted. Thomas began coming in earlier, during slower hours. We talked more. Not about my marriage, not about escape. About logistics, about systems, about how people end up stuck, not because they're incapable, but because no one ever explains the rules. One evening, as I was restocking bags, he said, I started my company working nights at a warehouse. People assume things about power that aren't true. I looked at him. Like what? That it comes from force, he said. It doesn't. It comes from patience and timing. I remembered that later. The breaking point didn't come from Eric. It came from Donna. She showed up one afternoon while Eric was out. Let herself in with the spare key she insisted on keeping. She walked through the apartment like an inspector. "You've been distant," she said. "Eric says you're cold." I said nothing. She turned on me suddenly, her face inches from mine. "You think you're better than us now?" she snapped. "Because you work a register and talk to strangers?" That did it. Not because it hurt. Because it clarified. "You don't get to speak to me like that anymore," I said. Her eyes widened. "What did you say?" I said no, I repeated. She slapped me. Not hard enough to bruise. Hard enough to remind. I didn't hit back. I stepped past her, went into the bedroom, and locked the door. She pounded on it, screaming that I was ungrateful, that Eric would deal with me, that I'd regret this. I sat on the floor and waited. When Eric came home, the shouting started again. Louder. Messier. I didn't engage. I picked up my phone and dialed Cynthia. "I need to leave tonight," I said. "Do you have somewhere safe?" she asked. "Yes," I said, surprising myself. I did. An hour later, with Eric yelling and Donna crying in the background, I walked out carrying only my purse and my documents. I didn't look back. I drove to a small furnished apartment owned by a nonprofit partner Thomas had mentioned. Temporary housing. No lease, no questions. The door closed behind me with a sound I'll never forget. Not a slam, a click. That night, Eric called 27 times. Donna left messages ranging from pleading to threatening. I didn't answer. I sat on the bed in that quiet room and stared at my hands. They weren't shaking. The next morning, I filed for separation. I didn't feel brave. I felt precise. And for the first time in years, my life felt like something I was actively shaping instead of enduring. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I didn't know that the man who had offered me a card would later stand beside me in a courtroom, not as a savior, but as someone who believed I could stand on my own. All I knew was this. They had underestimated how dangerous a woman becomes once she stops asking for permission. Leaving didn't make the noise stop. It changed its pitch. The first week after I moved into the temporary apartment, my phone buzzed constantly. Eric swung between rage and remorse. Donna oscillated between threats and guilt. Harold sent a single message that read, "You're tearing this family apart." I didn't respond to any of them. Silence, I was learning, was no longer something done to me. It was something I chose. The apartment was small, one room, a kitchenette. Furniture that had been chosen for durability, not comfort. But it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, it was mine. The first night there, I slept with the lights on. Not out of fear, out of habit. At work, rumors traveled faster than facts. Someone had seen Eric yelling in the parking lot one evening, before security escorted him away. Someone else said I'd been having an affair. Pete called me into his office. "I'm not asking for details," he said carefully. "But if you need schedule adjustments, we can do that." "Thank you," I said. "I'll keep my hours." That mattered to me. Consistency. Control over something small but solid. Thomas didn't say anything at work. Not a word. No special looks, no questions. He treated me exactly the same as before. That restraint told me more than any speech could have. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Cynthia helped me file for a temporary protection order based on documented incidents. Photos, voicemails, the broken phone, Donna's messages, Eric's texts. The judge granted it without drama. Eric was ordered not to contact me. When the paperwork arrived, I felt something close to disbelief. Not because it worked, because no one argued with me. For years, I'd been told what counted and what didn't. What was real abuse and what I should just tolerate. In that courtroom, the rules were different. Facts mattered. Donna showed up uninvited at the grocery store one afternoon. She waited near the exit, blocking my way. "You think a piece of paper can stop us?" she hissed. I didn't slow down. I walked past her and said, "You need to leave." She followed me to the parking lot. I took out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. Calmly, clearly. She left before they arrived. That was the moment she understood. I wasn't bluffing. Eric tried to fight the separation, claimed abandonment, claimed I'd been manipulated. His lawyer asked for mediation. Cynthia advised against it. Not because you're weak, she said, because he's still trying to control the narrative. I trusted her. At work, Thomas asked me one evening if I wanted to join a small group discussion after hours. Nothing formal, just employees and a couple of community partners talking about job training programs. I said yes. The conversation was practical: resume workshops, skill certification, advancement paths for people stuck in entry-level roles. For the first time, I saw a version of my future that didn't stop at the register. Afterward, as we walked out together, Thomas said, "You ask good questions." "I always have," I replied. "I just didn't think anyone wanted the answers." He smiled. "That's rarely true." Eric violated the protection order 2 weeks later. He showed up at the apartment. I didn't open the door. I called the police. He was arrested. Briefly. Released with a warning and a court date. I felt sick afterward. Not from guilt, from the finality of it. There was no going back now. Donna called Cynthia, screaming that I was destroying her son, that I was ungrateful, that I'd manipulated the system. Cynthia listened and documented everything. "She's helping you build your case," Cynthia told me afterward, without realizing it. The hearing was set for the end of the month. In the meantime, something else happened. Thomas asked me to lunch, not at the store, not near my apartment, a quiet cafe downtown. "I want to be clear," he said as we sat down. "This isn't charity, and it's not obligation." I waited. "I've admired how you've handled yourself," he continued, "and I'd like to get to know you better, only if that feels appropriate to you." There was no rush in his voice, no expectation. I said yes. Slowly, carefully. Dating felt foreign, dangerous, like stepping onto ice you weren't sure would hold. But Thomas didn't push. He listened. When I told him about the protection order, he didn't flinch. When I told him I wasn't sure who I was outside survival mode, he nodded. "That makes sense," he said. "You're recalibrating." That word again. Everything in my life was adjusting around a new center. Eric's family tried to turn mutual friends against me. Some worked, some didn't. I learned who believed women only when it was convenient. The hearing arrived. Eric sat across from me, eyes hard. Donna glared like she wanted to burn through my skin. The judge reviewed the evidence, the violations, the pattern. The protection order was extended. Eric's lawyer advised him to comply. Donna cried. I didn't look at her. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Thomas waited, not hovering, just there. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know," I replied. We stood in silence for a moment. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. That landed differently than praise ever had before, because it wasn't about endurance. It was about choice. That night, back in the apartment, I unpacked my few belongings properly for the first time. Hung clothes, organized drawers, bought a plant. I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She wasn't fearless. She wasn't healed, but she was no longer owned, and that was enough to keep going. The separation didn't make me lighter. It made me heavier in a different way. Responsibility has weight when it finally belongs to you. The first bill arrived 2 weeks after the protection order was extended. Rent for the temporary apartment. Modest, subsidized, still more than I'd ever paid on my own. I stared at the numbers, then at my paycheck, and started doing math the way people do when they're trying not to panic. I could make it work. Barely. I picked up extra shifts, learned which hours brought the best overtime, cut back on everything that wasn't essential. No takeout, no new clothes. I walked instead of driving when I could. Control looks boring from the outside. From the inside, it feels like oxygen. Eric's lawyer filed a motion asking for spousal support. Cynthia called me the moment it came through. "He's claiming dependency," she said. "That you were the primary earner and he can't work due to stress." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "He shoved me into a coffee table," I said. "That's not stress, that's choice." "I know," she replied, "and the judge will see it." Still, it meant more paperwork, more documentation, more patience. Eric showed up to the first mediation session looking smaller than I remembered. Not humbled, just diminished. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Donna wasn't allowed in the room. That alone changed the dynamic. When Eric tried to speak for me, the mediator stopped him. "She can speak for herself," she said. I answered questions calmly, directly, without explanation. I wasn't there to be understood. I was there to be clear. Outside the legal noise, my life continued. Thomas and I kept seeing each other. Slowly. Coffee, walks, long conversations that didn't revolve around trauma. He told me about his company, Hale Distribution Group, how it had started as a regional operation and grown through logistics contracts no one else wanted, how patience had beaten speed. I told him about the register, about memorizing produce codes, about how people treated cashiers like furniture. "Do you want to do something else?" he asked once. "Eventually," I said. "But not because I hate where I am, because I want more choice." He nodded. "That's the right reason." At work, Pete pulled me aside again. "There's a training program opening up," he said. "Inventory management. It's a step up. More hours, more responsibility." "Why me?" I asked. He shrugged. "You show up, you don't panic, you don't disappear." I accepted. Eric heard about it from someone and sent a message through his lawyer, accusing me of trying to outgrow him. That phrasing stuck with me. Outgrowing. That was exactly what it felt like. Donna escalated. She posted vague things on social media about ungrateful wives and family betrayal. Mutual acquaintances tagged me. I didn't respond. Then she crossed a line. She came to the store, not to yell, to cry. She waited until I was off the clock, cornered me near the carts, and grabbed my hands. "I raised him better than this," she sobbed. "You broke him." I pulled my hands away. "You raised him to believe he owned me," I said quietly. I corrected that. Her face hardened. "You think you've won," she said. "You don't know how the world works." "I do now," I replied. She left without another word. 2 days later, Eric's spousal support request was denied. The judge cited the protection order, Eric's refusal to seek employment, and documented abuse. The room was silent when the ruling was read. I didn't smile. I breathed. That night, Thomas cooked dinner at his place. Simple food, no ceremony. "You don't have to celebrate," he said, "but you should mark it." "I will," I said. After dinner, we sat on the couch, not touching, just close. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "I care about you, but I don't want to be the reason you feel safe." I looked at him. "That's good," I said, "because I already do." He smiled then. Soft. Real. Later, alone in my apartment, I opened a notebook and wrote down every boundary I'd learned to name. I don't owe explanations to people who hurt me. Love doesn't require endurance. Money is a tool, not a leash. Silence is powerful when chosen. I didn't know yet that the real confrontation was still ahead, that Eric's family would make one last attempt to reclaim control through the one thing they believed I cared about more than myself: my job. My reputation, my future. They were wrong about one thing. I cared about truth more. And once I'd chosen it, there was no leverage left to pull. They came after my job because it was the only place left where I was visible. Eric's family had lost access to my body, my home, my money. They couldn't shout at me, corner me, or scare me into compliance anymore. But they still believed I was small, replaceable, one complaint away from disappearing. They were wrong about the process. They were right about the timing. It started with a meeting request from Human Resources. Subject line, neutral. Tone, polite. "Please stop by when you have a moment." I felt it before I read it, twice. In the office, a woman I barely knew sat across from me with a printed sheet. Her name was Angela. She looked uncomfortable. "We received a report," she said. "Allegations of workplace distraction. Personal matters affecting performance." I waited. She continued. "Specifically, that you've been involved in ongoing conflict that's creating an unsafe environment." I almost laughed. "Unsafe for who?" I asked. She blinked. "I'm just relaying the complaint." "Who filed it?" I asked. She hesitated. "A family member of your spouse contacted corporate." There it was. They couldn't reach me directly, so they went around me. I took a breath. "Do you have documentation?" I asked. Angela looked surprised. "We're in the preliminary stage." "Then I'd like to provide mine," I said. I slid a folder across the desk. Photos, court orders, police reports, the protection order. A timeline of events, names, dates. Angela flipped through it slowly. Her expression changed with each page. "I wasn't aware," she said quietly. "No one ever is," I replied. The meeting ended without warning or write-up. Angela asked permission to consult legal. I agreed. That afternoon, Pete pulled me aside. "I didn't know they could do that," he said. "I'm sorry." "They can try," I said. "That's different." Eric's lawyer sent a letter 2 days later, accusing me of defamation for damaging Eric's reputation at work. Cynthia laughed when she read it. "They're fishing," she said, "and they're not very good at it." "Should I be worried?" I asked. "Only if you start lying," she replied, "which you haven't." Thomas heard about the HR meeting from someone on the board of the nonprofit. He didn't intervene. He didn't offer to. He asked one question. "What do you want to do next?" That question changed everything. "I want to be unmovable," I said. He nodded. Then we build around that. Not emotionally, practically. He connected me with a career advisor his company used for displaced workers. Not as a favor, as a service. Her name was Janet Collins. Direct, efficient, no nonsense. "You have more transferable skills than you realize," she said after one session. Inventory management, conflict de-escalation, process adherence. "You've been managing chaos for years." "I didn't choose that," I said. "No," she replied, "but you mastered it." Within weeks, I was enrolled in a certification program. Nights and weekends, hard work, real momentum. Eric's family didn't know that. They thought I was still stuck behind a register. Donna escalated again. She filed a complaint with corporate, accusing me of theft. Petty cash, gift cards, time fraud. Every claim was false. Every claim was documented. Loss prevention reviewed footage, timesheets, transactions. The investigation closed in 48 hours. No findings. Corporate sent a cease and desist letter to Eric's lawyer. Any further harassment of employees through false reporting will be pursued legally. That was the moment the power dynamic flipped. Not because I'd won, because they'd lost credibility. At mediation the following week, Eric looked frantic. His lawyer whispered furiously. Donna sat outside the room, barred again. "I want to settle," Eric said suddenly. "Just end this." "On what terms?" the mediator asked. Eric glanced at me. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "No contact," I said. "Permanent. Full compliance. No more third-party interference," Eric's lawyer protested. I didn't engage. The mediator looked at Eric. "Those are reasonable," he agreed. The paperwork was signed. I walked out of that building without shaking. At work, the training program intensified. I learned systems, forecasting, ordering cycles, shrink prevention. I liked the predictability, the logic. Pete noticed. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I'm not distracted anymore." Thomas and I continued carefully. He never showed up unannounced, never spoke for me, never made promises he couldn't keep. One night, after a long study session, I said, "You know I don't need to be saved." He smiled. "I know. That's why I'm here." The final blow came quietly. Eric's family tried to sue me for emotional distress. The case was dismissed in preliminary review. Frivolous. Retaliatory. Cynthia framed the dismissal letter for me. "Not as a trophy," she said. "As a reminder." That night, I sat in my apartment and realized something unsettling. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires engagement. I was finished engaging. They had tried to erase me, then discredit me, then intimidate. All they'd done was document their own behavior. I went to sleep that night with my phone on the nightstand instead of under my pillow. The quiet didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt earned. And for the first time since I'd walked out of that apartment months ago, I wasn't bracing for the next attack. I was preparing for what came after survival. The absence of chaos is louder than people expect. Once Eric's family stopped attacking, my days felt strangely hollow. Not empty in a sad way. Empty like a cleared room, waiting to be furnished with something intentional. I didn't rush to fill it. The certification program consumed my evenings. Inventory systems, vendor negotiations, loss analysis. I liked how the numbers behaved. Honest, predictable. They didn't shift based on mood or intimidation. At work, Angela from HR stopped by my register one afternoon. "I wanted you to hear this directly," she said. "Your file has been flagged as resolved. No concerns, no notes. Thank you, I replied. She hesitated. And I'm sorry you had to prove so much just to be left alone. I nodded. I won't have to again. That weekend, Thomas invited me to a charity gala his company sponsored. Not as a date, he made clear. As an option. You don't owe anyone an appearance, he said. But you're welcome if you want to see another world. I thought about Donna, about how she'd once told me I didn't belong anywhere that mattered. I'll go, I said. I wore a simple black dress I'd owned for years. Nothing new, nothing borrowed. The room was full of people who spoke in careful sentences and watched each other's reactions more than their words. I noticed how Thomas moved through it all without urgency, without needing approval. A woman approached me while Thomas spoke with a board member. You're Laura, she said. He's mentioned you. I raised an eyebrow. Only good things, I hope? She smiled. He said you're precise. That word followed me lately. Later that night, a man introduced himself as Victor Lane, general counsel for Hale Distribution Group. He asked what I did. I work at a grocery store, I said. He didn't blink. That tells me almost nothing, he replied. What are you good at? I answered without hesitation. Systems, pattern recognition, staying calm under pressure. He nodded. Those translate. I drove home alone that night, my head buzzing, not with fantasies, with options. Eric tried to contact me one last time the following week. Not directly, through a mutual acquaintance who sent a message saying Eric was finally getting help and wanted closure. I forwarded it to Cynthia. She responded with one sentence. No response is the response. I blocked the number. At work, Pete announced a restructuring, a new inventory coordinator position. Internal applicants encouraged. You should apply, he told me quietly. I don't have the title, I said. You have the competence, he replied. Titles follow. I applied. The interview panel included Angela from HR and a district manager I'd only met once. They asked about process improvement, shrink reduction, team communication. No one asked about my personal life. That was a first. 2 days later, I was offered the role. It came with a raise, predictable hours, a desk that wasn't a register. I accepted. Donna found out within a week. She sent a long email from a new address. Accusations, nostalgia, threats disguised as concern. I didn't read past the second paragraph. I deleted it and changed my email again. Thomas and I talked about the future one evening, sitting on my couch, shoes off, no agenda. I don't want to rush anything, I said. Good, he replied. Neither do I. I studied his face. Why me? He considered the question seriously. Because you didn't turn pain into performance, he said. You turned it into structure. That landed. The final thread tying me to Eric unraveled quietly when the divorce decree arrived. No drama, no alimony, no shared assets beyond a clean break. I signed it and mailed it back the same day. That night, I cooked dinner for myself and ate at the table instead of the couch. It felt ceremonial. I wasn't celebrating escape anymore. I was acknowledging arrival. End of Chapter 7. Tiếp chương 8. Chapter 8. Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It settles in quietly, the way certainty does, after you've made enough decisions that no longer require permission. My first week as inventory coordinator felt unreal. Same building, same lights, different posture. I wasn't behind the register anymore. I had keys, access, a schedule that belonged to me. People spoke to me differently, not better, more carefully. I noticed who adjusted immediately and who struggled. That told me everything I needed to know about them. Pete congratulated me on my first day and then stepped back. He didn't hover. He didn't try to take credit. That was leadership, even if he'd never called it that. The work was dense. Reports, forecasts, vendor calls. I discovered I liked solving problems that didn't scream, issues that could be prevented if someone paid attention early enough. For years, I had been paying attention to things other people ignored. Now, it counted. Thomas and I kept our lives deliberately parallel. No merging schedules, no shared finances. No public declarations. He never tried to rescue me from work stress. He asked questions instead. Let me answer them fully. One evening, after a long day, I told him about a supplier who kept shorting shipments and blaming logistics. I documented everything, I said. Patterns don't lie. He smiled. That's how you build cases. Quietly. That word again. Quietly. Eric faded into the background of my life faster than I expected. Once the divorce finalized and the protection order expired without incident, there was nothing left connecting us. No shared friends, no shared memories I wanted to revisit.
Donna tried once more.
She sent a handwritten letter to my workplace. Not threatening, not apologetic, strategic. She wrote about family values, about forgiveness, about how people should remember where they came from. I read it once. Then I placed it in my desk drawer and closed it. Some things don't deserve a response. They deserve containment. The real turning point came unexpectedly. Corporate scheduled an audit. Routine, they said, but I knew better. Audits don't just measure numbers. They measure trust. The auditor assigned to our location was meticulous. Asked questions others didn't think to ask. I answered calmly, provided documentation, explained processes without embellishment. By the end of the second day, he nodded once and said, "You've stabilized a system that was bleeding quietly." I took that as the highest compliment I'd ever received. The report came back clean. Better than clean. Recommended as a model for similar stores. Corporate sent a brief email acknowledging the work. No fanfare. Just recognition. That night, Thomas invited me over. He cooked. We talked. Nothing heavy. At one point, he said, "You know you don't disappear in rooms anymore." That's because you're not looking for permission, he said. He was right. The last loose end tied itself off on a rainy Tuesday. Cynthia called. With prejudice, I repeated. They can't file it again, she confirmed. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat back in my chair and felt something unfamiliar. Not relief. Finality. That chapter of my life wasn't paused. It was closed. I drove home that evening through slow traffic, rain streaking the windshield, and realized I wasn't replaying old arguments in my head anymore. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of plans. The first time I said no without explaining, it surprised me how little fallout followed. A regional director emailed, asking if I could absorb additional responsibilities temporarily while another store reorganized. The message was polite, flattering even, but vague in ways I recognize now. I read it twice. Then I replied with one sentence. "I'm at capacity, but I'm happy to recommend someone else." That was it. No justification. No apology. The director thanked me and moved on. For years, I'd believed refusal required permission, that no only counted if it was softened enough to be ignored. I was wrong. Around that time, Thomas's company entered negotiations to acquire a struggling logistics firm. The news wasn't public yet, but stress followed him home in subtle ways. Longer pauses, tighter jaw. One evening, he asked me what I thought about a proposed restructuring plan. I read it carefully. "They're underestimating the human fallout," I said. "The numbers work, but the transition will fail if they don't account for trust loss." He leaned back. "That's exactly what I was thinking." "You didn't need me to confirm it," I said. "No," he replied. "But I needed someone who wouldn't flatter me." That was the moment I understood something important. Our relationship worked because it wasn't a rescue story. It was mutual respect. At work, I was asked to sit in on a cross-store committee focused on loss prevention. The room was full of people who talked loudly and listened selectively. I waited. When I spoke, I referenced data, patterns, quiet inefficiencies. The room went still. Afterward, one of the managers approached me. "I didn't expect that from you," he said. I met his gaze. "That's not my problem." He laughed awkwardly. "Fair enough." Eric resurfaced indirectly through paperwork. A notification arrived stating he'd failed to comply with a minor clause in the divorce settlement related to property disposal. Cynthia handled it swiftly. A letter, a deadline. He complied. No drama. Donna, on the other hand, made one last attempt to reclaim narrative control. She contacted a local church leader, claiming concern for my soul. The leader reached out, gently, asking if I wanted to talk. I declined. I'd spent too long being interpreted by people who benefited from misunderstanding me. That weekend, Thomas and I attended a small dinner with his closest friends. No donors, no board members, just people. Someone asked how we met. "At a grocery store," Thomas said simply. There was a pause, then laughter. Not mocking, surprised. I watched their reactions without shrinking. Later in the car, Thomas said, You didn't flinch. I don't hide anymore, I replied. The biggest shift came quietly, like everything else. I stopped dreaming about my old apartment, stopped replaying Donna's voice, stopped anticipating Eric's moods. Those ghosts don't leave because you confront them. They leave when they're no longer relevant. One afternoon, Pete stopped by my desk with an envelope. Corporate sent this, he said. They want you to consider a district role next year. I opened it slowly. It wasn't an offer. It was an invitation. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded. That's all they're asking. That night, I sat on my couch and thought about how far I'd come without ever raising my voice. I hadn't won by outshouting anyone. I'd won by becoming impossible to dismiss. And once that happens, people who rely on dominance lose their leverage. The phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. No matter what you choose next, I'm here. I smiled. Not because I needed reassurance, but because it was offered without strings. The idea of moving up scared me more than leaving ever had. Leaving was reactive, survival-based. You don't question instincts when the floor is burning. Advancing required intention. Corporate wanted me to consider a district role. Not immediately. Not formally. Just a conversation, they said. A chance to see myself differently. I didn't answer right away. I watched, instead. I paid attention to how people behaved around authority when they thought no one was looking. Which managers took credit? Which protected their teams? Which stayed silent when silence cost others something? Power reveals character faster than pressure ever did. Thomas noticed my hesitation. You don't have to say yes, he said one evening as we walked through a quiet neighborhood. And you don't have to say no just to prove something. I know, I said. I just don't want to trade one kind of invisibility for another. He stopped walking, looked at me. You're not invisible anymore, he said. Even when you're quiet. That stayed with me. At work, I sat in on another regional call. This time, I wasn't invited because someone needed help. I was invited because someone wanted my opinion. That difference mattered. When I spoke, people listened. Not because I was loud, because I was precise. After the call, Angela from HR messaged me privately. You've changed how people talk in those meetings, she wrote. They prepare now. I smiled at that. Preparation is respect, disguised as effort. Eric faded further into irrelevance. The last administrative notice came and went without emotion. No spike in my heart rate, no tension in my shoulders. He had become paperwork. Donna tried one final tactic. She sent a package. No return address. Inside was a photo album. Old pictures, family gatherings, holidays. Me smiling thinly on the edges of frames. A note tucked inside read, "We were happy once. Don't forget that." I closed the album and placed it back in the box. Happiness that requires erasure isn't happiness. It's compliance. I donated the album the next day. Let someone else decide what to keep. The conversation with corporate happened on a Wednesday afternoon. 2 executives. Neutral tone. No promises. They asked about systems, about people, about what I would change if I had authority beyond one store. I didn't pitch myself. I described problems I'd already solved and how they could scale. When the call ended, one of them said, "You don't talk like someone asking for a chance." "I'm not," I replied. "I'm explaining what I do." Afterward, I sat alone in my office and let the weight of that sentence settle. I wasn't auditioning anymore. I was offering value. That night, Thomas and I cooked together. No distractions. Music low. "You're not afraid of being alone anymore," he said casually. "I'm not," I agreed. "And that makes everything else optional," he added. "Yes," I said. "Exactly." I slept deeply that night. No dreams. No rehearsals. The next morning, I emailed corporate. I'm open to exploring the role. On a timeline that allows for proper transition. They responded within the hour. That works for us. For the first time in my adult life, I was moving forward without running from something. I wasn't proving anyone wrong. I was choosing something right. And that felt different in my bones. The closer I got to something new, the quieter the past became. That surprised me. I had expected old memories to resurface when life slowed down, to demand processing, closure, some final emotional reckoning. Instead, they faded the way noise does when you walk far enough away from the source. Corporate scheduled a site visit. 2 days. Observation only. I prepared without over-preparing. I didn't clean up reality to make it impressive. I let systems speak for themselves. That was a choice. On the first morning, the regional director asked to walk the floor with me. "You don't hover," she observed. "You notice." "I trust the process," I replied. "And I correct it when it drifts." She nodded. Most people do the opposite. At lunch, she asked something unexpected. "How do you handle conflict?" I didn't hesitate. I document. I de-escalate. And if behavior doesn't change, I remove leverage. She smiled faintly. "That's not how most people answer." "It's how it works," I said. That afternoon, an employee froze during a delivery issue. In the past, it would have escalated into panic. I stepped in quietly, reassigned tasks, corrected the mistake, and moved on. No lecture. Later, the director said, "You don't need authority to lead." "I know," I replied, "but it helps with consistency." When the visit ended, there were no congratulations, no hints, just a handshake and a thank you. That was fine. I'd stopped measuring progress by other people's reactions. Thomas and I had a long conversation that weekend. Not about careers, about boundaries. "If you take the district role," he said, "your time won't be your own in the same way." "I know," I replied. "That's why I won't take it unless it stays mine." He smiled. "That answer tells me you're ready." Eric's name came up one last time through someone else. A former coworker of his reached out to say he'd moved out of state. New job, new relationship, new narrative. I felt nothing. No resentment, no satisfaction, just distance. Donna never contacted me again. I heard through someone else that she'd started telling people I was cold and ungrateful. I let her have that story. It wasn't mine anymore. The formal offer arrived the following Thursday. District Operations Analyst. Trial period. Clear metrics. Exit option built in. I read every line carefully. Then I signed. Not because I wanted status, because I wanted impact without self-erasure. That evening, alone in my apartment, I opened the same notebook I'd started months earlier. I added one final line. "I choose environments where my presence is not a problem to be managed." I closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer. The work ahead would be demanding, political, occasionally exhausting, but it would be mine. And I had learned something essential. Survival teaches you endurance. Freedom teaches you discernment. I turned off the lights and went to bed without checking my phone. Nothing urgent waited for me there. And that was the clearest sign of all that I'd crossed into a different life. The morning I started the district role, I took the bus instead of driving. Not because I had to, because I wanted to remember who I was before everything expanded. The city looked different from that seat. Familiar streets, but with distance. I wasn't scanning for exits anymore. I wasn't rehearsing explanations. I was simply moving through space without bracing. My first week wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Meetings, introductions, listening more than speaking, watching how decisions moved from email to action. How authority flowed when no one announced it. I didn't introduce myself with my past. I introduced myself with questions. What's breaking quietly? Where are people compensating instead of fixing? Who is carrying more than they should? Those questions opened doors faster than any title. By Friday, I was asked to lead a small pilot. Nothing glamorous, 2 stores. A logistics adjustment that had failed before because no one had bothered to ask frontline staff what they needed. I asked. They answered. The pilot worked. That was enough. Thomas and I celebrated with takeout on my couch, shoes off, tired in the good way. "You didn't disappear," he said. "I didn't perform," I replied. We laughed softly. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the woman I'd been a year earlier, counting pennies, memorizing bruises, measuring love by how much pain I could absorb without complaining. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt protective because she had done the hardest part without knowing it. She had chosen herself before she believed she deserved to. Eric never reached out again. His family faded into background noise, then into nothing at all. Their attempts to control had relied on proximity and fear. Both were gone. I moved out of the temporary apartment a month later. Not into anything extravagant, just a place with light and quiet, and a lock I didn't share with anyone. The day I unpacked, I found the notebook again. I read the early pages, the rules I'd written while shaking, the boundaries I'd learned through trial. They weren't aspirational anymore. They were operational. I added one last sentence. "I will never confuse endurance with love again. At work, my name began circulating in rooms I wasn't in yet. Not as a story, as a solution. That mattered. Thomas asked me one evening if I ever thought about what would have happened if I'd stayed. I don't, I said honestly, because staying wasn't neutral. It was a choice that cost me myself. He nodded. And leaving wasn't a gamble. No, I replied. It was an investment. On a quiet Sunday, I walked past the grocery store where it had all started. Different manager, different staff, same fluorescent lights. I didn't go in. I didn't need to prove anything to that space anymore. What I had taken with me couldn't be shelved or returned. If you're listening to this, and parts of it feel too familiar, I want to say this clearly. Being mistreated doesn't make you weak. Staying doesn't make you loyal. And leaving doesn't require permission. Sometimes revenge isn't loud, or cruel, or public. Sometimes it's methodical, legal, quiet. Sometimes it's building a life that no longer includes the people who needed you small to feel powerful. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, controlled, or told to be grateful for less than dignity, tell me in the comments what moment stayed with you. And if you want more stories like this one, about family drama, betrayal, karma, and the quiet way the tables turn, like and subscribe. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the beginning of everything.